This video is sponsored by World Anvil. Hey, you know that feeling when you run a game for your players and you think, wow, what a fun one-shot or miniseries or low-level campaign that was, and now this story is complete, and I am content, and I've completed my work on this earth, and can ascend to become a being of pure energy. We've all been there. But then your players go, no, actually, we want to keep going. And you're like, oh, poop. Well, that's what we're talking about today. What happens when you run a game, and you just plan to run this self-contained adventure, but then your players jump in and say, no, do more. We want to play more. Do more games. And in keeping with the themes of this year's project, we're going to look at a few TV shows that started with a more or less self-contained story and then see how they handled it when they wound up running way longer than they expected. Specifically, the Stargate franchise and the Legend of Korra. If you like this video, make sure to consider joining my Patreon to help support the channel. I just uploaded a bonus video there. I'm doing a Q&A live stream pretty soon, and once the new SRD for 5.5 is released, I'm going to make some D&D PDFs for patrons. Plus, I need to buy a new dryer, so, any Patreon support is a big help for me these days. So if that's something you might be able to do, come check out the Patreon, that would be awesome. Now let's get on with the show. First of all, before you start prepping your new expansion of the campaign, you should figure out what your players most enjoyed about the game they already played. What aspects of that first campaign did they most respond to, and what do they want to see brought forward into the next phase of the campaign? For example, the Stargate franchise began with one standalone movie, and then spun off into a whole franchise of TV shows. And when they were developing that first show, they had to look at what people really responded to from that first movie. And it seems like they decided that the thing that made that movie stand out from other sci-fi films was its villain, an alien who posed as an Egyptian god so he could have unquestioned authority to rule over his subjects. So in the TV show, we now had a new evil alien posing as another Egyptian god. And as the series continued, we encountered more evil aliens who posed as ancient gods, and even a few nice aliens who did the same thing. The Legend of Korra, on the other hand, didn't quite learn this lesson. That show was only supposed to run for 12 episodes, but due to the very positive reception, it was picked up for a few more seasons. And overwhelmingly, one of the things people loved from that first season was the villain, Amon, a complex character who was definitely a bad guy, but had a tragic backstory and a motivation that sought to rectify a genuine flaw in the world of Avatar. And he was just the latest in the tradition of complex villains that made the Avatar franchise so compelling. And so it's kind of baffling that the writers didn't realize that, and in Season 2 they produced probably the worst villain in the franchise. And on its own, Unalaq would just be a disappointing villain, but part of what makes him such a letdown is that Amon was such a good villain. And I'm someone who generally enjoys a lot of Season 2. I think it's the weakest season, but I still like it more than a lot of other people do. But it definitely doesn't feel like it understood what actually worked about Season 1. And part of the reason why brings us to the next piece of advice for your unexpected campaign continuation. You want to stick to the same core premise as what people already liked, while also finding new dimensions of the story to explore. Again, looking at Stargate, the first episode of the show has them find a whole bunch of new gate addresses, so now the show can be more like Star Trek, with the cast visiting a new planet in each episode. You're keeping the same core premise. There's a Stargate that takes us to another planet that looks a lot like Earth at another point in history, but you're expanding the scope so you're not just limited to one planet, or just limited to civilizations modeled after ancient Egypt. And in the film, Ra was an alien who had taken over a human body. So the show expanded on that and developed a whole mythology, no pun intended, around these body-snatching aliens and how they work. However, this wasn't even the last time Stargate would have to continue their story past the point they expected. Because as I mentioned in another video, the creators kept expecting the show to get cancelled, so they kept finding good stopping points. And then they'd get renewed and they'd have to keep going. And at one point, they wrapped up everything they could think of, every major subplot they were dealing with. Then they ended the season with a victory lap where they traveled back in time and accidentally created an alternate universe, and Stargate always handled both time travel and alternate realities pretty well. Those episodes are always a lot of fun, and that season finale was really excellent. And then they got picked up again. So now they had to create some new villains. And so they decided to tackle the idea of aliens posing as gods from a completely different angle, keeping to that core premise, but exploring a new dimension. Because in the first 8 seasons, they had pretty much avoided having any aliens pose as the Hebrew God, or Jesus, or the Prophet Muhammad, for what I'm sure you realize are obvious reasons. So in Season 9, they introduced new villains posing as new gods, but that were heavily influenced by Catholicism, particularly in the Middle Ages. And so not only could they dabble in previously untouched aspects of Earth's mythology, like Arthurian legends, but they could also critique organized religion and Western civilization without also saying Jesus was secretly an evil alien or whatever. And as an added bonus, they could sidestep some of the uncomfortable ancient aliens built the pyramids conspiracy theory subtext that had kind of always been under the surface ever since the first movie. It was honestly a really smart way to expand the mythology, but still stay true to the core premise of fighting evil aliens with god complexes. Jumping back to The Legend of Korra Season 2, this is something the writers struggled with. They knew with Season 1 that they didn't want to write about another avatar learning how to bend water and earth and fire all over again. They had literally just done that. So when the show began, Korra had already mastered those elements. But we never seen someone learn how to airbend, and so that was the framework for Season 1. But once they got the green light for Season 2, they were out of elements for Korra to learn how to bend. So Season 2 had Korra essentially look for a master to teach her about the spirit world, and that was a smart solution, execution of that idea notwithstanding. But by Season 3, they dropped the idea of Korra needing to train and instead realized that we could just watch a fully realized Avatar trying to deal with new villains, and that would be exciting enough. And with Season 3 and 4, they really leaned into the idea that the villains reflect real-world political ideologies, like anarchism and fascism. That's something that worked about Season 1, and wasn't really executed well in Season 2. And honestly, the villains of Korra is kind of a whole broader topic that we'll discuss another day, but generally that was what they chose to focus on, bringing forward from Season 1 into the seasons that worked really well, Season 3 and 4. However, another weird choice made in Season 2 of Korra was to suddenly turn her father into not just the chief of the Southern Water Tribe, but also the banished prince of the Northern Water Tribe. And as someone who generally likes that story, like I said, I do like the Water Tribe Civil War story of Season 2, I also still think it's kind of bullshit that they retconned her father to suddenly have all this important backstory, and then he just happens to be the father of the Avatar as well. I think you could tell an interesting story about a noble turning out to be the Avatar and having to deal with her noble family as well as her Avatar responsibilities, but because that wasn't established at all in the first season, it feels like an obvious retcon and not a natural extension of the story. Ironically, I would have accepted it if they'd instead established that her father was just some rando who became the chief of the Southern Water Tribe after his daughter turned out to be the Avatar. In fact, at first I thought that's what they were doing in Season 2. I thought her father had basically parlayed her role as the Avatar into a bid for him to get higher status in the Southern Water Tribe. That doesn't even make him a bad guy, it's just a natural extension. Oh, you're the Avatar's dad. We should probably see what he has to say. Hey, eventually, let's make him chief. Or maybe he is kind of a complex, bad, or maybe morally gray guy. I don't know, there's a lot you could do with that. But the reason I thought that's where they were going with that story is because we'd been given no reason to assume he had actually been a noble the entire time. So it just feels like suddenly they wanted to do Hamlet, but they hadn't earned it yet. It hadn't been set up in any way. Now, in fairness to the creators, maybe they had always known that her father was the chief, and maybe they'd even always considered that he might have been exiled from the Northern Water Tribe. Maybe it's not a clumsy retcon as it seems, but it was actually something that they'd always planned. But if that's the case, then that's kind of the perfect example of how important it is to properly convey information to your audience. And when we're playing D&D, it can be even harder to transmit that kind of world building to our players because we don't get a second draft at the table. Once we say it, it's canon. But thankfully, you can take advantage of your prep time to get your ducks in a row, figure out your world building, and then rather than trying to download all that information into your players' heads at the table, you can actually share that lore with them through a really convenient method if you use today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a tremendously robust toolkit that you can use to create articles for your campaign setting. You can make pages for monsters, NPCs, magic items, factions, and so much more. This way, if you always knew a character was originally from the Northern Water Tribe, you can put that in the article right away and share it with your players. And if you do just want to include that detail as a retcon, you can make it seem like you planned it all along by just slipping that detail into the World Anvil page. Because once it's written down, it's going to be a lot more likely that your players will accept that maybe you were planning it the whole time, even if you weren't. Having something in writing always makes it feel more official to your players. And World Anvil can make something feel even more official thanks to the incredible templates they offer. You can actually make your articles look like they were professionally designed, lending the whole thing an added air of authenticity. And honestly, any simple trick like that is great for any game master. It's always nice to have something that's super easy to put together, but that automatically looks like we put a lot of extra effort into it. And if you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. That's right, 51%. That is an incredible deal. Once again, just visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Now, I do have one last piece of advice when it comes to running these games, these unexpected continuations of previous adventures. And that's the fact that you should feel free to invent whatever you need to in order to justify a new campaign. Don't worry about setting up a sequel. You can just make up whatever you have to in order to sell your players on a new story. Again, let's pretend Legend of Korra Season 1 and the Stargate movie were games of D&D. Once those adventures were over, neither of them really had a ton of loose ends left dangling. As far as the Stargate film was concerned, the bad guy got defeated and the heroes got happy endings. But when the players said they wanted to keep playing, the GM just did some small retcons. Oops, it turns out Ra wasn't the only bad guy after all. And now they have a campaign premise that could run for several years. They also just ignored that one shot in the movie where Ra becomes an alien again because now the aliens are parasitic snakes that crawl into your brains, which gives them a whole lot more to work with. Stargate Season 8 ended without any hints at another larger threat because, as far as they were concerned, the story was over. But, uh-oh, green light, make some more show. So they open the next episode by going, okay, fucking Merlin, I guess. And you know what? That's fine, your players will go along with that because they want to keep playing. Legend of Korra Season 1 also didn't end with a clear road forward. The bad guy was defeated, and Korra had finally figured out how to airbend. But the writers found another point of weakness for her lack of connection to the spiritual side of things, which had been established in Season 1, and so they exploited that as the premise for a new season. The weaker aspects of Season 2 are more about the moments where you can see the writers choosing to do things that don't match with what was established. Like, why is Mako a cop now? And why are he and Korra suddenly so bad at being in a relationship? Of course, if you do have some loose ends, you should probably expect your players to want to keep playing, so they can get resolution for the story threads that matter to them. When Stargate SG-1 finally ended, the creators managed to make a pair of movies to help tie off the final loose ends. When Firefly ended, they got a movie to finish off the important parts of that story. And later this year, I'll probably make a video about how to do a campaign wrap-up to cover these kinds of loose ends. But the point is, if you don't have these sorts of loose ends, you shouldn't feel like that's a hindrance toward running another installment of your campaign. You can always invent more story. Unknown threats, undiscovered secrets, unintended consequences. Remember when the bad guy tried to cast that ritual at the end of the last game? Well, that somehow unlocked the powers of this other bad guy. You gotta go deal with him now. Hey, we found these weird ruins. Uh-oh, we accidentally woke up a nest of vampires. Gotta deal with those now. Look, it's a spooky ghost ship. Oh, and it's full of lore tied into the mysteries the players have specifically been asking about for years. Guess you gotta go check it out. It would obviously be nice if you could neatly map out your whole campaign in advance and have your game play out exactly according to plan. But setting aside the fact that that's a lot more work than you should actually have to do, and we'll talk more about that later this year, but also, even if you do finish telling your story, your players might say, more, more, more! Maybe they really love playing these characters, or maybe they just want to play their characters to the highest level possible and experience new tiers of play. Maybe they do feel like there are loose ends they want to deal with, or maybe they just have other items on their D&D bucket list they want to take off. Ultimately, the point is, don't panic. You can always invent more reasons for this group to come back together, even if you weren't planning on doing anything else with these characters. But ultimately, it has to be the player's decision. They need to decide whether they want to keep playing with these characters or not. In fact, the reason I'm talking about this now is because this is about to happen on Critical Role Demystified. If you're not familiar, that's a series on this channel where I break down each episode of Critical Role and see what lessons we can learn as players and as game masters. And we're nearing the end of the Chroma Conclave, and after that arc, Matt asks his players if they want to continue with this campaign. And the barest of spoilers here, but apparently the players said, yeah, we do have more things we want to do. There will be loose ends they want to explore. But Matt left that decision up to the players. He ran the Conclave arc like it might be the last arc of the campaign, diving into each character's backstory and offering closure wherever he could. He was ready in case his players said, yeah, that was a satisfying place to leave these characters. We've said all we can with them, let's try something new. But instead they wanted to play as Vox Machina for a bit longer, so Matt had to come up with another story arc for them. But we'll discuss that in more detail once we get there. Of course, at this rate, it's going to take forever for us to get to the end of the Chroma Conclave arc, let alone reach the end of the campaign. And I feel bad that I've missed a few installments of Critical Role Demystified. I've definitely fallen behind schedule. And so I want to make it up to you. So, just for April.
Oh man, we're doing it. We're finally doing it.
Just this once.
Oh my god, I'm so excited.
And mainly so I can sync up a certain dragon encounter so it falls on Dragon Week in April.
This is all I've ever wanted.
Starting next week, I'm going to be doing weekly Demystified episodes all month long.
Hooray!
So if that's something you want to see, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell and come back for those videos every Thursday. And probably a bonus video on one of those Mondays to make sure that everything syncs up nicely. There's going to be a lot of Critical Role videos coming in the next few weeks, so I hope you're ready for them.